Last week, in front of the Texas Capitol, former U.S. Representative Chris Bell announced that he would be entering next year's governor's race. He is the latest Democratic candidate to announce their bid for governor. To tell us more about his platform and why he's decided to enter this race, please welcome Chris Bell to the show. Chris, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
If you want to join the conversation, if you've got questions, comments, thoughts, give us a call or text 713-440-8870.
Mr. Bell, Governor Abbott had more than $87 million in his campaign account at the end of June. He has won all three of his previous gubernatorial races by double digits. Do you have what it takes to go up against him and actually win?
Absolutely.
Where's your money, Chris?
In my pocket, mainly. And that's a problem because it's just loose change. And it's certainly not $87 million. But money isn't everything. And obviously what money really does in politics is gives you an opportunity to get your name out. And Greg Abbott has already gotten his name out, and that's his problem. People know Greg Abbott, and they don't like the direction the state's moving, and his approval rating is at its lowest point in his entire governorship, down to 39% with 50% disapproving. And that's not really where you want to be, especially when you're asking people to hang around for another 4 years, which would be unprecedented. And I've compared him to Cousin Eddie on National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, that he's just the guest that won't leave. And it's time to get that old RV out of the governor's mansion driveway and move on so we can move in a more positive direction. And I think people are looking for change, and I think they're going to want someone with experience and someone who will stand up and fight and has a proven record of doing that. And I do, and that's why I jumped in the race.
Where do you see his weakest points?
I'm sorry?
Where do you see his weakest points?
His?
Yeah, Abbott's.
The corruption, mainly, and I think people are sick and tired of it, seeing, huge no-bid contracts being handed out to people who've given huge contributions to his campaign, what we watch with private school vouchers, that being really an edict from billionaires who want to see kids moving out of public schools and into private schools. And some people say that really want to see Texas become a theocracy, which scares the hell out of me. And that is an issue that I have watched closely even before I got into politics. For some reason, the whole idea of choice in public schools has always fascinated me. And I always wanted to see it within the public school system, because I do think it can be powerful for a parent to be able to move their child out of an underperforming school to a high-performing school. But I think it should be within the public school system. And the way to improve education in Texas is not to get kids out of public schools and then try and get more and more into private schools. It's improving public schools. And I think that is going to be an issue that people are really going to pay a lot of attention to, because anyone who's watched the school system, Celeste, I think you have school-age children still, recognizes that a lot of things in public school education are very antiquated. Our models are very, very old. And we need to wake up and look at that. Are there modern ways and more innovative ways to teach children in this day and age? And that's what I've been talking about a long time, and I'm been talking about a lot during this campaign.
I know we'll get into a lot more of your platform. And as a Democrat, I assume you've been very disappointed with a lot of things that have been going on in state government. I'm curious, what was the moment that struck you that said, I'm going to enter this race? Was there a particular moment where you had said, I've had enough of the direction it's going, and I'm the one who can step in and make a change?
It's a great question. I have jumped into races too fast before in the past, and I was not ever going to make that mistake again. And this has been a long, thought-out process and discussions with a whole lot of people. But it really was the private school voucher issue. Living in a rural area now, seeing how important the Brenham Public School District is to Washington County and how it really brings the community together. And that's not just in Brenham. That's in a lot of small towns all across the state of Texas. And I thought there's just no way, because they don't want that. They don't have the number of private schools that you have in Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth and major metropolitan areas. And to see just how that was driven forward by folks with a bunch of money was really offensive to me. And that was sort of the last straw. I'm certainly not new to this, and I know that money has played an outweighed role in Texas politics for a long time, but it's time to do something about it. And that's what I did when I was on city council, when I saw that there were reforms that needed to be made in terms of ethics. I put those in motion as the chair of the ethics committee. When I was serving in Congress with one of the most, the most corrupt politician at that time in all of America, Tom DeLay, and a so-called truce being in place where members of Congress weren't supposed to file ethics complaints, I said, baloney. I mean, that wasn't written down anywhere. It was an unwritten truce. And I said, he needs to be called on the carpet. And I did. And that's what I'm talking about when I say people want someone who will stand up and fight and take on all of this head on. And it's really interesting because ethics reform is not that difficult if you have someone who's willing to push forward the reforms. But what politicians like to do, there's nothing to vote on here, so we can just keep acting the way we always have. Well, you cannot look at the Texas system and say, hey, that's a really good system. Let's not place any limits on campaign contributions whatsoever. That's absurd. And I think people understand that.
You did pretty well against Rick Perry. I think the numbers are like 30% to 38%.
I think it was 39 to 30. It was about a 9-point spread, and the closest since Richards.
That's pretty good against Rick Perry. So what's your game plan up against Abbott? Can you take some of what you used against, because they're very different candidates. Perry was just kind of in the days when the lieutenant governor had all the power and the governor really didn't. And now it seems to me like the governor has as much power as the governor wants. So what's the game plan going to be against Abbott? Pull some from Perry or completely different?
Well, I think it'll be a very different race, and it's interesting because we find ourselves in very different eras. And I was thinking about it today on the way over. We didn't even have social media, really. I mean, it was just sort of trickling out back in 2006, and now social media is overwhelming. And I think that was a fascinating election. I learned so much, and I learned so much about Texas, and that is another reason that I think that I will be perfectly positioned. I think folks want a more moderate governor, someone who will be reasonable, who's able to work with the other side, something I've always demonstrated throughout my public life. And we've got to get past always thinking that we're right. And I'm disappointed in Greg Abbott. I've known him a long time since he was on the bench. Obviously, I'm a lawyer. I knew him back when I was covering the courthouse for KTRH Radio. So I've known him a very long time, and he was very affable, easy to get along with judge. But it's almost as if he's not comfortable in his own skin, and that being chased by Dan Patrick the whole time he's been in office, trying to be more and more and more conservative. And it's almost taken on a level of meanness at time, and it's all political calculation. You all earlier were talking about the 18th Congressional District. Well, look at the way that's been handled. Sylvester Turner, that seat has been open now. It will be open for over a year. We're supposed to have a representative government, and that's just a level of kind of crude politics that, in my opinion, isn't necessary.
Do you think he'll even debate?
Sorry?
Do you think Greg Abbott will even debate whoever's running against him?
Will he debate?
Yeah, because he hasn't in the past.
Well, I would hope so. And, of course, if he feels threatened, then he'll debate. He'll be anxious to debate. And that's another thing. I probably have more televised debate experience than anyone in Texas, given the nature of the races I've run for governor, for mayor, things where you have televised debates. And it's interesting because that's not easy. All of y'all have been on television a lot. And I was on television a little bit myself, but it's still a whole different experience. Yeah. And you learn how to do it, and oftentimes that kind of experience helps. So I certainly would love to debate Greg Abbott.
To get to that point, you've got to get the nomination, and I'm guessing at this point for a Democrat to win in the state, it has to have unity of all the Democrats behind that candidate to even have a chance to get forward. There are other people that want this position, not just you. Have you talked with the other candidates? What's the understanding? How aggressive is Are your campaigns going to be against each other? How much? Because you don't want to tear down if you need to build up. What's your plan at that point?
A lot of times the primaries will turn into family fights, and I would like to avoid that as much as possible. I think that Democrats in the state of Texas have been given a great choice when you look at the spectrum of politics. I would say that Gina Hinojosa, who I know not well but have known for a long time and is much further probably to the left than I am. Andrew White is probably much further to the right than I am. And this is sort of sounding like Goldilocks, and I'm just right. But I'm in the middle, and I've always, been center left and socially progressive and fiscally conservative, and that will continue. And I think that gives a lot of folks, disaffected Republicans, independents, and Democrats, someone they can rally around.
On the scale of Mamdani to Newsom, where do you fall?
Well, it's just so interesting where, because I've been very disappointed in seeing the Democratic Party go further and further to the left and kind of over the cliff. And it was at a time when I thought that if we did moderate our views and move somewhat to the middle, there were a lot of people who were very upset after Donald Trump was elected in 2016. I think they would have been willing to look at the Democratic Party, but we really didn't give them much of an alternative there.
Mr. Bell, you mentioned being fiscally conservative, and Texas has one of the largest and fastest growing economies in the United States. And that's something that Governor Abbott has touted repeatedly, that how the economy has experienced such significant growth since he has been a governor. What is your vision, given the fact that Texas is massive, we have multiple industries? What is your vision for the state from an economic perspective?
We have the 8th largest economy in the entire world in the state of Texas, not just in the country, in the entire world. And yes, we are the most financially distressed state in the entire country based on the number of bankruptcies, both commercial and personal, based on the number of uninsured. And so we really have been creating the state of haves versus have-nots, and that is going to have to change. And the number of uninsured is something that is a horrific number, and we all know the hardships that brings. And I really want to focus, and I've been talking about it a long time, we have to do a better job on preventive care and neighborhood clinics. If cities can't afford to do that on their own, or counties can't afford to do that on their own, the state needs to be willing to step in and provide that type of funding. And I believe that type of care on the emergency room can no longer serve as the family physician or the neighborhood doctor. It's not cost effective. It makes no sense. And a lot of the things that people end up going to the emergency room for could probably be avoided. But those types of issues, and there's a lot of talk about affordability, and there needs to be, and states need to be looking at everything they can possibly do, the areas where we regulate, if we can keep electric bills down and frozen for a while, the things that are really eating at people who are living really month to month. Those are the types of things we need to be focused on, and not just the things that are going to impact maybe the top 1%.
Right.
In our state.
And we did get a question from YouTube that asks, how should the state's $24 billion budget surplus be allocated?
Well, that's a great question. I think there's going to have to be a lot of attention paid to infrastructure. Infrastructure is boring. I've never heard you all start off your show talking about, God, I heard about the best bridge project this morning.
Keep listening.
I've given you an idea now. Yeah. Ernie will be coming in. God, no. But it is, it isn't sexy, and they're long-term projects, and we live in this era of age of immediate gratification. We don't want to wait long for that hamburger in the fast food line. We want to see results immediately. Well, infrastructure takes a while, and we can't keep doing infrastructure by tragedy. Can't wait for something horrific to happen before we say, gosh, we should have put in that alarm system in Kerr County. We should have done something about drainage over in Meyerland. These types of things we need to be spotting and addressing along the way. And we haven't been doing a very good job of that. in Texas. So a lot of the money needs to go there. We also need to be mindful that you're not always going to have a surplus, and you want to have money left behind in those thinner times as well.
You said you had a discussion with other people about running. How to go with Allison, your wife?
Oh, she was just thrilled to pieces.
Yeah, she's like, "Who's this? No thanks." Click.
No, well, no, she's we're fine, and she's supportive, but she's been through a lot of this, and I get it. I'm just wired differently, I guess. Yeah. I've always been one to, if you get knocked down, you get back up, and losing elections isn't easy. But what's interesting about it, a lot of times you learn more from the ones you lose than sometimes the ones you win. Yeah. And so, like you mentioned, the governor's race in 2006, that was a fascinating race, and it was an education about Texas and getting to visit all the different areas and seeing how different Texas is in different geographic locations. It was fascinating, and I loved that race, and I loved the people I got to meet, and I'm hoping to have a similar experience this time around with a different result.
Oftentimes we in the cities forget about all those different areas that you're talking about. You visited all of them. A big concern for a lot of Texans, especially along the border, is border security. What are your thoughts and feelings on that and the way it's been handled to this point, and what would you do differently?
Well, we have to have a secure border, and I think opening up the border to the degree that the Biden administration did obviously was a step in the wrong direction. I've always advocated to use greater technology to guard wider swaths of the border so you can send messages down to Border Patrol agents. That requires that you have enough Border Patrol agents, and when you don't, they have to be replaced. And we need a pathway to citizenship. I think people are going to soon wake up to the fact, if they haven't already, that it's ridiculous to pretend you can just deport that many people without it having a significant impact, especially on a state like Texas, where they're part of the fabric of our state. And so certainly steps need to be made. And, we were talking about modernization, innovation earlier. That's a very antiquated system as well that is in desperate need of updating. But the truth of the matter is, and I heard this a long time ago, I think it was in the 2006 governor's race, and somebody told me from Laredo that as long as you have people, living in cardboard boxes on mudslide hills, they are going to find a way to get into the United States, because we've always been the land of opportunity. And I think we want to continue to be the land of opportunity, but within reason. And we certainly have to control our borders.
What about the involvement of the federal government, the way the president has been deploying troops and just that general interfering in the workings of our state from that level?
Well, that is a step in a very wrong direction in the way, and I think that's going to be costly for Greg Abbott's and the National Guard to Illinois. That's just not really the role of the Texas National Guard, to be going up to Illinois to help out ICE agents. And so, I think there's overreach and gone too far, and people are seeing it, and I think there's going to be a hard rebuke of that.
One more, talking about the federal government and interfering with the workings of Texas, the redistricting and the way that came down from the president asking the governor to change things up. How would you have reacted? What could be done differently? And what do you think of this whole redistricting?
Well, we have a governor who spends about 50% of his time thinking about being president, and the other half kissing up to one. And I'm not going to be a governor who sits by the phone and waits for the president to call and tell me what to do. And that happened with the redistricting, and it happened with the National Guard that I just referenced. And you asked me a minute ago, what was a moment? That was probably a pretty big moment. I went to testify before the House Redistricting Committee, and I thought it was very eloquent. I just told them, this is so stupid. And and it was. And it was back when it happened, when I went through it and got redistricted out of my seat. And not so much for me, but my colleagues. We had so much experience at that time. The U.S. House of Representatives works on seniority, and we were in a position to chair the Rules Committee and chair the Homeland Security Committee, all these key committees. We were going to have chairs from Texas, all wiped away because of redistricting. That's just foolish. And you're not doing yourself any favors when you engage in this, and we've seen what it's led to with California quickly responding. And that is just not the way to draw congressional districts, and it's not the way to run a government.
Here's a yes or no question. Will you veto any anti-LGBTQ bill and protect trans kids with an executive order on day one? Yes or no?
Yes. And that's really always been my record. Frank, I know you said I couldn't say anything beyond yes, but has anybody ever followed that rule? Not just saying yes, especially a politician. We always have to talk more.
Well, that's a YouTube question.
But no, I think treating people fairly and recognizing, all people are entitled to basic human rights has always been a part of both my political and personal makeup, and nothing about that is going to change. And we really need to move away from issues that aren't hurting anybody and start focusing on things that really are going to make a difference in people's lives. I think that will alleviate a lot of the toxicity that we see in politics. And we need to understand that not every issue has to be a partisan war. And a lot of things I'll be putting on the table during the course of this campaign are things that I hope a lot of folks can get excited about.
We are speaking with Chris Bell, a former U.S. representative who announced he is running for governor. If you would like to join the conversation, you can call or text 713-440-8870.
Probably the biggest problem people have in this country right now, or at least perceived big problem, is the economic disparities we see. Economic plan for helping Texans to feel more secure in their future financially.
First of all, I think that goes back to education as well. I have a belief that excuse me, when a child graduates from high school or an individual graduates from high school, they should be one of two things, either ready to go to college or ready to go to work. And the latter, we haven't done a very good job of. And there are a lot of apprenticeship programs, internship programs through unions and others where kids could be learning a trade while they're in high school, graduate, and come out and make a very good wage and live a very nice middle class, sometimes an upper class lifestyle, because those jobs are so much in need. And we really need to be looking at that. We shouldn't just be shuffling people through high school and just say, oh, we just need to get them out and go on, and it doesn't make any difference. And, years ago we got away from that and decided everybody needed to go to college. That was the only thing that mattered. And I think there have been shifting views about that. Still is very, very important. But we can't lose sight of vocational education, and we did for a long time. And I think that would have a big impact on the future of the state. And there are other programs. I'm not ready to roll them all out because we're still doing some fine-tuning. But it's not just about affordability, but it's also about livability and opportunity. And it's that last point, the opportunity, that is oftentimes lacking. And I think the state can do a better job of creating opportunity for young people.
Recently the state passed, the House passed a bill, a $20 billion water infrastructure bill. Was that the right move? What are your thoughts on that? Because we understand that is a main priority for the governor.
Huge. And we've been talking about water, Celeste, for a long time and not doing a whole lot. So that was certainly the constitutional amendment was a move in the right direction. It's probably going to cost a lot more than that. It's not easy. It's certainly not an easy issue in a state like Texas. But you look at what's going on in Corpus, where they're really literally running out of water.
Right.
And we can't. And that's going to be repeated in other parts of the state unless we get really serious about it. And I assure you, I would be, I hear a lot about it where I live now. There's a lot of concern.
And Texas is also very interesting, right? Because you mentioned Corpus Christi, South Texas. That's where I'm from. And it's very different from, West Texas, or you have very major cities like Austin and Dallas and Houston. As the governor, what is your vision when you're looking at the state from a holistic view, how you are going to work with all of these different pockets of the state to make sure that everybody is essentially benefiting from the policy that you're putting forward?
And you really have to come in with that knowledge and that idea and recognize that they're so different. If I can just share what I think is a great story, because most of you all will remember years ago, and it must have been 20 years ago, when we were having huge immigration marches. I think there was a giant one in Dallas, and there was a huge one in Houston. They've gotten a lot of news coverage, and I was in the Valley campaigning, and I said, y'all must have had a huge protest rally down here, didn't you? And they looked at me and they were like, what were we going to protest? We run everything here.
Right.
So,
right.
And it was really true, and people don't understand that. And folks kept trying to talk about sort of the seamlessness between border towns and their Mexican counterpart. Right. And it's very hard for someone living in Houston to completely understand that. But there are, because of the vastness of the state, there are different concerns in different areas.
Yeah. Well, to that point, it's easy to look at Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and look at the blue that's there. But you're going to have to do more than that. It's going to take more than those four cities, and not only do you got to find more Democratic votes in the big cities, you certainly got to find a lot of it in the rural areas.
Well, and you have to stop discounting what people in rural areas are concerned about and recognize there are going to be very, very different views on issues between rural and urban areas in a lot of cases. And that needs to be addressed. And you can't just say we're only going to craft solutions that are going to appeal to big city folks and forget about the impact that's going to have on the rural areas. And I just don't think we have done a very good job of communicating with the rural areas.
A lot of people make a big point about always talking about the first 100 days, what happens in the first 100 days. If you get this governorship, first 100 days, what are the three priorities that we will see as people that you have pushed forward?
Well, I'll certainly push for proposals. Excuse me. I will certainly push for proposals to have some model schools set up so that we can really start looking at AI and the impact it's having on certain private schools and how it's working. I will certainly put folks in places where they can make recommendations in terms of improving public school education, try to come up with not just Chris Bell's ideas, but ideas from all over. Because that's been a big part of my frustration. I think we know what works when it comes to teaching kids, but I don't think we're taking full advantage of it. So that's certainly something on day one. Another one of my initiatives that I'll be rolling out later, I will get to work on that absolutely in the first 100 days, and it has main focus will be on opportunity. I will certainly start looking at ways to reform campaign financing in the state of Texas, because I think that's going to be dramatically important going forward. And I would make sure that we immediately start identifying the dangerous areas.
Unfortunately, I have to identify we're out of time. Thank you for coming in.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, Chris Bell, a former U.S. representative who is running for governor next year. Chris, again, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thanks for having me.